been. All right. Well, I'm glad y'all are here, and I'm glad for anybody who tunes in later because Saturday morning just isn't their thing. But yeah, I'm just really grateful just to have a body of people, whether here or not, that cares about the community and wants to see what we can do to be neighbors helping neighbors. So I just really have a few things that I wanted to share. Update on the 25th Street Safety Partnership that I've talked about a few times over the past year, and then see if there's anything any of you want to bring to the table. But yeah, Frida, so thank you for bringing up, before I started recording, bringing up the meeting that's happening from 10 to 12 about the potential community center over at Lex Field. I guess they're going to fill in, I don't know, I guess you have to take away the baseball field to fit something in there because all that land is basically currently used, except for that one, the blacktop area that's beside the playground. That's in a little rougher shape, but yeah, so if I'll try to get more information on that and keep that on my radar because it's not technically in our footprint, but it's right beside our footprint, and so it matters, and we'd engage with that. On the same note, something else that is in that same realm that's technically outside of our footprint is the Unity Park initiative that Rick Tatnall has been working on for the past 5-6 years. That's the land that's right behind MLK Middle School. And he's been working on finding ways for that land to not just sit unused. And there's been a lot of movement over the past year, particularly in finding out, one, who owns the land, because nobody actually really knew who owned it. Parks and Rec thought they owned it. RPS thought they owned it. And I can't remember. I think it's RPS that actually has ownership over it. And so they've started to work out a partnership with Rick and a few others. So you actually are starting to see some movement. There's some gardening stuff that's right to the right of MLK Middle School in that little section. But the section that Rick's been looking at for Unity Park is that field where the basketball court is, the baseball fields. The track is also part of that. And if you haven't been back there in the past year, Rick's actually planted a, I don't know, 1,000 square foot, 2,000 square foot, I don't know, big old garden plot that they are hoping to expand and make into a big community garden. But the big thing that I want to make sure is on y'all's radar is April 4th. Can't remember if that's a Monday or Tuesday. It's a Monday. They are going to have a recurring MLK themed event. It's going to be in that field behind there. And so it's in the last 2 emails that I sent, but I would definitely encourage anybody who's around that day to check it out. There's more information about it in the email. I'm unfortunately going to be out of town. So over the next month, I'll probably send another email to see if anybody wants to formally kind of be present as New Visions, or at least commit to being there for some sort of time, just so New Visions can have some sort of a presence. But I'm sad to miss it. But any questions about any of that before I start talking about the 25th Street?
That recurring event, is that going to be an afternoon or evening event?
Let me, you know what? I'm just going to pull it up. So I keep getting distracted because I keep on hearing that movement in my walls.
I understand.
It's like well, what really concerns me is if it is a bird, they're going to make their last nest and then they're going to lay eggs. And then I'm going to eventually start hearing baby birds when I'm trying to zoom my zoom.
Well, when I did have an exterminator over because I thought it was a bird, when they smoked it out, it actually a squirrel came running up.
Oh man, you had a whole forest up in there.
I don't know what was going on. He put a wire mesh over there, but I still got issues with the other dry vents. Yeah. You can see where they've been building the nest.
Yeah. Well, you know, this used to be their land, and then we built a bunch of houses over where the trees were. So I guess it's our fault. All right. So the MLK Freedom Fest, Monday, April 4th, 2022 at MLK Unity Park behind MLK from 3 to 7. This event, free admission, will be an all-day affair with formal programming from 3 to 7 held on, under, and around the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Bridge, the gateway to Richmond's East End. The festival intends to inspire Richmonders of all ages to become more engaged in support of their RVA community, using the life example and legacy of Dr. King as their guide. Plans for this inaugural festival will be presented annually on this important date in history. So So yeah, it's gonna be annual. The reason they're having it on April 4th, one of the reasons is because they're trying to coordinate it also with the school's spring breaks so that they can engage youth even more. And so, yeah, so it's definitely worth checking out. And the Unity Park, as I've shared before, has the potential to be a really valuable resource to the entire community, and particularly because there's a mindfulness around, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, how feedback is received. If you're just reaching out to a small band of people, you're going to get a limited collective response. And so there's been a lot of work to try to get a wider array of feedback around what that should look like, and particularly from neighbors who have lived here longer versus just new neighbors and all that. So any other questions on that event? Awesome.
Are they still accepting vendors for that event?
I would imagine that they probably will be accepting vendors all the way up to like the week before. With it being with this, they've done events there in the past, but with this one being a new incarnation of it, I'm sure they're going to be really pushing to get people. So as I can try to see if I can get more information on that specifically, but I would think that they'd be open to still bringing in, more vendors and things like that. There is a, in the email, there's a link to click. Oh, no, that's a file. There's a link to a flyer, and the flyer may have contact information on that. Yeah, I think it's definitely worth.
Have you already forwarded that email to everybody?
Yeah. So actually, the last 2 or 3 emails, it's been a lower down section of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can find it in there. Well, I wanted to take time to also update you all on the 25th Street Safety Partnership Initiative. I don't know if there's any other words attached to it, but a year ago, in response to some of the gun violence that was happening on 25th Street, particularly the corridor from Venable to Fairmount, a lot of people began to really press on Cynthia Newbill to do something. And so she gathered together folks who were already engaged in the neighborhood. So whether it's civic associations, nonprofits, the Market at 25th had a presence there, business owners, trying to get a wide body of people that already already were engaging in that corridor to talk about what's happening, what could be done. One of the big things that happened over the course of that year was the realization that before an entity like that should start jumping in and doing things or fixing things, they should probably take a step back and talk to neighbors and find out how the neighbors feel, what the neighbors feel like should happen. And so they partnered with this entity within VCU that their big focus is creating, implementing, and then analyzing surveys. So they do, I mean, and I'm talking like there's a whole department and a whole process. And so they collaborated with VCU to do that and ended up creating this survey, which some of you may have seen, that went out summer into the fall. That basically asked questions about how long have you been in the community? How do you feel about the community? What would you like to see change in the community? And the first way that went out was through folks actually walking around on the corridor and giving the survey in person. I think there were some paper versions of it. There was a digital version of it that went out shortly after that, and a few events where there was a table that was set up. I can't remember for sure, but I think maybe 170, 200 something surveys were collected. And so I want to share some of the feedback from that, or some of what they actually. All right, let me try this again. I was about to share a folder, but I don't need to share the whole folder. All right. So can you all see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me see if I can move this out the way. No, I can't move that out of the way. All right. So this is when they gathered all the data. This is what some of the results were, and they're still fine tuning some of this. But they wanted to start off by focusing on what is it that, you know, those who are taking the survey really love about that corridor, about the area. And so these are some of the responses: the people and the neighbors, the walkability, community engagement, diversity, community outreach, closeness to downtown Richmond. Then they went on to what are some of the things that are needed? What are some of the resources that people are looking for? So stable and affordable housing. We've been talking a lot about that within New Visions. Addiction services, mental health support, youth activities, affordable foods and services, physical health and support. Then the infrastructure, upkeep and growth, cleaning up of public areas, road improvements, affordable housing, sidewalk repair, green and recreational areas, increased lighting. Safety concerns and suggestions. So people talked about violent crimes and theft, area around Ocean's Grocery. That came up on a lot of the surveys. That specific corner was mentioned. Drug selling, public intoxication and drug use, additional police presence, loitering and harassment. And then, well, let me stretch this out for me to see it well. Okay, I'm blocked a little bit for me. Oh, well, I'll read it as best I can. Communication plan, actions to be considered by work groups. So this part is the next step. Now that all the data has been gathered, is Councilwoman Newble wants to create separate work groups around some of the themes and then find action steps on how to do something with that. So getting a group together to talk about what a community communication plan looks like, neighborhood outreach plan, a group focused on community activities, group focused on support infrastructure efforts. This is where the screen is blocked for me, so I can't see it, but you can probably read it. It's got a little piece that just completely blocks it. Anyways, so the big takeaway here is the next step is to take the community's feedback and say, all right, how can we engage in these specific areas? One of the ways that this is also moving forward is that, this started with talking about gun violence, and there was, so I don't know if y'all have seen this, but Samuel R. Brown Sr. was just hired as Richmond's new community safety coordinator. And so there's actually been a little bit of drama over the past week. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's been some back and forth between the mayor and an entity called RISC. Richmonders, oh man, I should have this memorized. Interested in serving communities. Basically, RISC is part of this national effort to each year highlight, 2 or so key issues in a community, and then gather a body of people. And it's predominantly a lot of churches that will come together, gather around this issue, gather around finding solutions, and then collectively, like literally gather when it's not a pandemic, virtually gather as a large group of thousands to ask city leaders to implement what came out of these planning sessions. And so gun violence was the theme last year or the year before. And after doing a lot of research, RISC came up with their recommendation for how to address gun violence in the community. They proposed it to the city. And this is where, depending on which story you listen to, there's a few different stories going on. From RISC perspective, they feel like the mayor and city officials have been dodging them and refusing to meet with them and refusing to implement or consider implementing what they came up with, the model they came up with that has been used in other cities. On the mayor's end, and this is where some of the tension came up, RISC actually went to City Hall last Friday and basically was saying, saying, Mayor Stoney, we want you to meet with us. We want to talk about this. A lot of people are dying. Mayor Stoney sent a public letter out basically saying that RISC was bullying them. RISC, somebody that's part of RISC sent a public letter out to Mayor Stoney saying, no, we're not. You're refusing to meet with us. You're not doing anything. So it's been this tension. But during the 25th Street Safety Initiative, one of the things that came out about that is that, and this is the first that I'm hearing about it, so I'm not sure how it's been communicated, but there are some things that Richmond is starting to do to address gun violence. And this is what their plan is. And so part of it is hiring a community safety coordinator who is going to help to implement these things. So Samuel Brown Sr. says, a native of Richmond, Virginia, he was educated in Central Virginia schools and obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in public administration from VCU and a Master of Arts in Christian education from Virginia Union. Served in the community in various capacities, with an emphasis on community building. And so anyways, you can, I sent that out in the last email and you could read more about that. And I was asking some questions about what their plan is moving forward, what that will look like. And so they have a 6-tiered approach for gun violence prevention and intervention. And so there's a lot I need to learn about this, but you could see that in the honeycomb up top. So they want to, all right, review the commissions, crisis intervention and wraparound support, intensive case management, credible messengers, training and quality assurance, prevention. And they're in phase 1 of what that looks like. So the mayor declares gun violence in a public health crisis, respond to community recommendation to hire a community safety coordinator, establish community partnerships to distribute micro grants to community organizations, lock arms campaign reminding firearm owners to keep their firearms safe and secure, hire violence interrupters to serve the community as healers. And so anyways, I wanted to get this information out to you all. One, because it's just good to know what's happening and what the city's approach to it is. My plan is to, I'm going to connect with the new community safety coordinator, and I want to get more information about, just learn more about him and what things look like moving forward and what his anticipated movement is, particularly around sometimes with city things. There could be initiative, but really it takes a few years for it to actually start yielding fruit, because there's a lot of meetings and a lot of committees and planning that happen before actual action happens. So I want to learn more about the timeline. The other piece is I have a lot of connections with folks and pastors who are also a part of RISC. And so I want to learn more about, press into more of that tension, find out, is there a way that, because this is our community, the gun violence is happening around us. And so from my vantage point, tensions, it isn't helping solve the issue. And so what can we do to actually press forward? How can RISC have a place at the table, and all these things? And so that's my plan. So that's the latest from the 25th Street Safety Initiative, is feedback from the survey and an update on what the city is doing to address gun violence, and also an update on RISC's efforts to press forward on what their research has shown. So I just threw a lot of stuff out there. Let me hear comments, questions.
I did read some of the letters that were going back and forth between RISC and Mayor Stoney's, himself, his office, and what have you. And I think the biggest thing is they're not seeing how they can definitely work together. And having a middle ground, basically, of them sharing information. I believe they just don't share information with each other. That's the biggest thing. Because there are claims at the mayor's office, which I do frequent. I don't work for them, but I do frequent because I'm a publicist and I work with a lot of different entities.
Yeah.
And they blame RISC for taking matters into their own hands, where they're not law enforcement, they're not lawmakers, they're not people who can affect change legally, in a sense. Whereas RISC is saying, well, we have to do something because we're in the neighborhoods and it's our people that are our close people that are being affected by this. We are boots on ground already. So why aren't you utilizing us? So there's several issues there but they all lead to communication. And that's a huge issue in Richmond altogether.
Yeah.
everyone wants to start their own initiative to make a change and get the pat on their back. It's not about that. It really isn't. I moved here August 2020, so I'm able to, sit back and look at everything that's happening. Yes, and it's the same story that I dealt with when I lived in Mount Vernon, New York. But we did find common ground when we enforced the conversations. We forced conversations that were hard, that were tough, between not only the mayor's office, but also with Parks and Recreation. We brought everyone into the conversation. Parks and Recreation, we spoke with the mayor's office, we spoke with the school board. And then we also had an outside entity from the state as a state representative, just to be able to have smaller groups. It's not a song and dance. This is not what it's for. It's literally to just have a conversation. We supplied some donuts. Oh, and we had the PTAs in the area as well speak. In these areas. The president of the council would speak. Not all of the PTAs, but only one person from each group was there to represent what needed to happen. And then we also created an action plan that each of us had a part of, and we met every single month. And that's not happening here in Richmond. Everybody wants to have their own thing. So I guess the focus of anything that could be done is trying to get everyone in the same room with at least one representative.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate that feedback. And yeah, I find myself thinking a similar thing, particularly around, I appreciate you naming this common issue, just, I mean, all over the place and in multiple realms of entities kind of having their idea of what needs to happen, and several entities kind of go in those different directions. And this is something that I've seen even like in our community here when it comes to supporting youth, for example. A lot of different youth entities doing a lot of different things. And without partnership, then there's this one disconnect, but it almost limits the impact you have. And this is kind of my hope for the 25th Street Safety Initiative Partnership. Gosh, I need to find out what the official name is, because I feel like it's a bunch of words that I just keep saying. But what I've thought about often over the past year, and what I'm really hoping will kind of come together this year, is we don't necessarily need a new thing to happen. We've already got a load of entities that are already, they have roots. So Real Life is right there on 25th. Urban Hope is right there on 25th. There are churches on 25th. The libraries on 25th. And there are entities that have been serving in the community for a while. And what could it look like for somebody or some entity to kind of gather that wealth of information? Like, here's what's already happening. Here's what they do. And find a way to bring better like you said, communication. That's what got me excited about that flyer. No problem, Frida. That's what I liked. That's what caught my eye at first about that flyer, where it said building community communication. Is, if we could find a way for these entities that are already doing the hard work to not have to be stuck in silos doing them, or to not be alone, or to not be struggling to find resources, then that actually could make the city's job easier. They don't have to create a new initiative. They just need to support what's happening. And what we know is gun violence isn't this isolated thing that happens in and of itself.
Correct.
It stems from all these other parts. So as Real Life is addressing the things they're addressing, and Urban Hope is addressing the things they're addressing, and youth organizations are addressing the things they're addressing, that is going to impact how much gun violence is happening. So I'm tracking with you, and yeah, I think that's what we need to see this year. Is it is very clear that there's a tension. Here's what I can say is, I've heard people that are connected with both ends of the spectrum that are affirming there is a desire to see gun violence ended or addressed. like an authentic desire to address this issue. So that is a shared thing. Everybody involved wants gun violence to stop. It's the question is knowing that this tension exists, knowing that there is a breakdown in communication, knowing that there's these issues, and knowing that there's probably multiple solutions. How do we move forward? Like we still gotta move forward in some way.
There is no one solution. That's the thing. And once everyone realizes that there is no one solution, then there can be a cooperative effort. In what we call Switzerland. We said we created a Switzerland in a way that every month the meeting was moved to one of the entities' selected spaces. So if we have to have a meeting at City Hall, fine. If we had to have a meeting at, you know, one of the options from the Board of Educators or whatever, from the Richmond Public Schools people, right? The school board. If we have a meeting, like every month it traveled into a different entity, and then that way they didn't feel like it's just one person and we're always on this person's turf. Our neighboring city, they had their meetings at the YMCA just because they was like, nope, we just want to make sure everyone is heard and feels welcome in a space that's not owned by any one of the entities. So I guess it could just start with just not even a conversation, an invite. You're cordially invited to, you know, our meeting to address the concerns or what have you, and have them really come, you know, offer some cookies and crackers or whatever. People love food, right? And let's talk about where we go from here. And then also a lot of people want to talk about things, and they may have, like I said, they have these plans, right? But no one else knows their plan. It's like, hey, do you mind sharing what your plan is? It's the tone of the conversation. A lot of things get really bad just because of the tone that is used in an email or a conversation. Whereas it's something that should be considered. You know, it's something that should be considered and heard out. It's just that the tone wasn't appropriate for the situation. So yes, you know, everybody has their plan. They have their action plan. They have their tenets. They have their bullet points. They have all of these things. But how do we hear that? How do we make sure that we're creating a plan that's good for this area? And that's really where the conversation can start in this meeting. It's all with a Switzerland type invite.
It sounds like what I hear you saying, Sheena, is that when they have the meeting, they might need somebody that's a mediator or to facilitate and take those points and put them maybe on a separate board or thing that shows where everybody has a common ground, what they do agree on. And sounds like you would be a good person to do that. You know, I mean, you know, I don't, you know, rather than pay somebody $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 come from out of town and consult and then send us back a report, somebody who's committed to the area, who's going to do follow-up and feedback. A lot of times over the history of my life and working and people coming in and doing things, they're never there for the follow-through. You know, they're there for the original meeting when, you know, everybody does a brainstorm and it comes to, you know, like when we had the charrettes and stuff, everybody came in, but, you know, we didn't hear about it later. I don't think a lot of us were in the room when they hashed out what things they were going to do. And then, you know, so you have 1 or 2 representatives from each group and set ground rules, you know, be willing to listen. Comprehend and not interrupt. A lot of times people listen with the intent to reply, but not to understand and comprehend the other person's side. So it sounds like it needs a good mediator or facilitator to handle those meetings. And it may take several meetings before, you know, like Paul said earlier, just get things moving. But that sounds good. And at a neutral place, that's not on, and everybody comes and nobody has that authority or hierarchy over anyone else. Everybody comes and it's a level playing field. I think that's what you're saying.
Paul, I had a couple quick questions around this. the images you shared a bit ago, I saw them in the meeting invite. Are those available anywhere else? And are they available in isolation? And the reason I asked that, so the 25th Street corridor thing has popped up in a variety of conversations I've had in and around the neighborhood. I didn't know that that output report you shared existed. And there's a committee within CHA that wants to focus on 25th Street corridor. Lieutenant Hogan, Sector 112's lieutenant. I have a ton of folks that are asking me about doing service projects. The newly evolving Churchill Central. We want to figure out something to do on 25th Street. I'm not aware that any of these parties know that output report you just shared exists and answers a lot of the questions that folks are kind of noodling on. So
yeah,
is that output report final one? Has Dr. Newbill embraced those findings? You know, is that the operative thing we want to go forward with? Because I think there are a number of folks in the neighborhood that are trying to invent or recreate those findings and recreate the strategies that kind of already exist. And so instead of you all going out and thinking about doing that legwork, it's already been done.
Yeah.
How do you want to fit into it?
Yeah.
As opposed to, I feel like a lot of folks are going to spend a lot of time trying to recreate that and probably not recreating it and then just going on to something else. But if you can put in front of them, hey, we've already done all this. What part of this do you want to bolt onto? Which one of these working groups do you want to be in as an association, as, you know, as et cetera? So
yeah. No, it's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it. One, I probably should have answered some of that in the email. So the infographic I shared is not public yet. So they just put that out, and I probably should have put an addendum. I wasn't explicitly told not to share that, but I also came to the meeting later, so maybe don't share it yet.
Yeah.
But I also think it might not be officially final. So this was the first meeting in months that we were able to have, and this was the first time they were reporting the findings. And I think that there's some fine tuning that they want to do before making it official. That said, I don't think that this is restricted information in the sense that so the next step that Councilwoman Newbill is going to do is with these work groups or whatever she called, I can't remember what they were called, but she wants to, it was a very slim group when we met on Thursday. It started off when I don't know if you've ever been in the VCU Health Hub that's by the market.
Yeah.
We have a room down the steps.
Around the corner.
Yeah, around the corner, very
screen.
large room, and it has dividers. So when we first started, we filled that whole room.
Yep.
When I met on Thursday, we were in the tiny little section by the window.
Next to the window. Yep.
So, and it was, I would say 75% police officers that were there. And then like, you know, Councilwoman Newbill, a few official people, Samuel was there. That's the new safety coordinator. And, you know, as far as like your everyday people, maybe 2 or 3 of us. And so there's a lot of reasons for that, why that's diminished. So what her next step is to go back to her original list and begin to reach out and say, hey, we're doing these groups that are focusing on these different things. Would you like to be a part of this group to kind of build out how we address it? So to that end, anybody that's involved in the stuff that you were just mentioning, either if they or you want to bring me into the loop to connect to Councilwoman Newbill and Sam Patterson, I think anybody is welcome to the table for those things, especially if they've got a vested interest, they're already engaged. I think the table is open for that, and it's just a matter of making that connection. And that's something that I thought about a lot last year too, is especially when it started, there was a lot of people at the table, which was great to see. But I would look around the room and I'm like, but this person's missing, this person's missing, this person's missing. This table doesn't have everybody at it yet.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, to what you were saying and going back to what Sheena was saying, without that, then the natural default is people still care about the issue. So they just kind of create their own thing and do their own thing if they don't know what's happening. Yeah. So that information will, I think, at some point be officially public. you know, if I get in trouble for sharing it, so be it. It's whatever. It's not really sensitive information. That flyer that I shared about the city's effort, I would think that that's public because Samuel had a big old pile and he was handing all that out. But the infographic there, once there is an official one, I will share that out in an email and say, hey, you can give this to whoever. But you could definitely tell the people about this information.
Related question, and it might answer that to a degree. Is Dr. Newbill still convening kind of East End Civic Association presidents with any regularity?
That has not happened in a while, and I think that's for a number of reasons. I mean, once the holidays hit, that kind of impacted a lot of things. I think the plan is still there for that to happen, but I don't know when that's gonna restart.
And I asked that because something like this might cascade down through that, but if that's not happening, then it can't cascade.
And the times that we were meeting, she would bring up this 25th Street thing. I will say this, part of the reason I think, at least one of the reasons that there was a slimming down of the group and a breakdown of things is I think for some people, the first phase of collecting information took a lot longer than some people wanted. And I personally, like, I mean, I'm, you know, in that time, a lot of gun violence happened right around my home. So like, I definitely want to collect information, but also I don't want to only meet and not actually be doing something. And I think for some people, they felt that even stronger and they're like, this is useless. So I'm out. And so that's why I'm glad we're entering this second phase. But for some people, it might need to be kind of a rebuilding of trust. Like this is there, things are going to happen. Things are like the wheels are now turning. I do think the information is important that was gathered. And I think especially there are several voices in the room, and the room as a whole was on board with this, but several voices, my own included, saying, with these kind of things, it can be really easy to get certain voices and not get other voices. Particularly, you know, on 25th Street, there are a number of folks who are unsheltered, that don't have phone, don't have email. And if a survey is only done online, we are only going to get the people who are answering, have email access.
Yep.
If somebody doesn't often feel like their voice matters, then they might not even bother with a survey because it's like, what's the point? And so that was communicated, like, how are we being very mindful, intentional of getting the voices of all of our neighbors? Yeah, go ahead, Sheena.
A part of that I made an initiative from September to November of last year. No, December of last year. From September to December last year, to help a lot of the homeless or the population that just didn't have emails. I actually worked with the East End library to set them up with emails. And then I was a SafeLink representative as well. So we got them phones so that they can communicate. So between the phones and the partnership with the library, we were able to service 120 of the population to make sure they had emails first and phone.
Yeah.
So smaller things like that matter. They do. And they're a piece of that puzzle. A little bit of how I know these things. I was an internal auditor for Nestle Nespresso. A lot of things a lot of things that you have to do when providing certain quality management, that's where I see this falls into, is finding out what are the daily habits of people. And it's more psychological and social rather than lawmaking and big picture. You have to get into the daily habits of people. And a lot of the daily habits of the people in 25th that didn't have emails is that they always went to the East End Library.
Yeah.
All the time. They frequent the library for whatever reasons, and they would figure out whatever they need to do for the day by being at the library. And so these are the same initiatives that need to happen going forward, even within gun violence. It's like, what are the other things that are impacting this?
Yeah.
And what are the small tweaks that we can be a part of for this to make it lower?
Yeah, that's good. And Adam Zimmerly, is that his name? But he's with
Yep.
the Houston Library. He's been at almost every one of the initiative meetings. So I've been glad about that because, I mean, you just named it.
Oh yeah, I spoke with Adam too. Yeah, so
yeah,
that's how I
space
found
is-
out about you guys, is through Adam, actually.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So yeah, I'm glad that he is at the table because because that's where my mind goes to the most is I'm constantly trying to be mindful of who needs to be at the table but isn't. And when we're talking about that specific corridor, there's just a lot of folks that the library has direct access to and direct relationship. I think that's even more important. It's not just access but relationship. I mean, he's connecting with people, and because otherwise, I mean, and this is what we've seen and what a lot of areas, cities have seen as things change is if you're not doing that, there's always going to be voices, and you could end up getting like solutions, but it ends up being solutions for an entirely different demographic, an entirely different new neighborhood that's materialized. And those that, called that space home theirs no longer feel that's the case. And so yeah, I think I mean, the hard thing is everything that we're talking about, it's like this. It's a big behemoth thing, but really, I mean, the ways forward is a lot of what we're talking about. How can we be more intentional and mindful around communication, where the pitfalls and the opportunities? How can we be more intentional and mindful around relationships? So it's not just looking at demographics, but actually connecting with people, and who is stepping into that space. Because this is the other piece, and this is one thing that I appreciated that came out when Samuel was talking about his role and on the paper, is they have they're going to be hiring, let's see, let me look up what this was called again. Hire violence interrupters to serve the community as healers. I need to get more information on what exactly that is, but these are individuals who are actually in the spaces where the majority of the violence is happening, in relationship with folks who may have direct connection. And so what this usually looks like is those grassroots ministries and nonprofits that are actually on the ground and building authentic relationships, rather than just somebody going in and saying, hey, stop doing that. It's like, hey, I know this just happened with your friend. Like, how you feeling? What's going on? So what I appreciate about that is when you just got a broad sweep, when you're just kind of saying, stop, don't do this, do that. It's a much different thing when there's this authentic relationship and there is trust that's been built and there's long-term engagement. And that piece is not something you can just write into a grant or throw together. Like, that takes a lot of time and work to build. And so I appreciate that there's a mindfulness on his end to cultivate and support those relationships. But all of this takes intentionality, takes focus, takes time, and takes a willingness to come to and be at the table. So on my end, I said this earlier, but my next steps are, I'm already in close relationship with a lot of risk folks. One of the pastors at my church is very involved. It was one of the ones speaking at the event last Friday. I want to connect with the new safety coordinator and learn what's going on there, because at the end of the day, no matter what the city does, what risk does, what other things do, for New Visions, in the last 2 years, I've had several murders. Like, I could throw a rock, like literal throwing distance from my house. And so New Visions is still going to engage in the space and figure out what we can do, how we can be neighbors helping neighbors. And if the city's providing things, if risk is providing things, if ministry is like, great, like, come to the table, let us know what you're doing, how we can support you, how you can support us.
Maybe you should also speak at the about New Visions at my event.
What was your event again?
My event is
the meeting
Battle of
thing. That's
the
oh.
Battle of the Bands. I'm producing Battle of the Bands
Oh, okay.
at Virginia Union University.
Oh, awesome.
So that's April 9th.
Okay. Yeah, send me the information on that.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's always in, when you get a reply from my email, it's in there.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in there. Like all that information is in it. Just come, let me know what your thoughts are and how you would like to speak. We just have a lot of, it's a community event. It's free. So everyone is going to be there. Youth are going to be there. Their family members are going to be there. We're expecting upwards of 3,000 people.
Oh, wow. That's a big deal.
Quick question, Paul, and I've got
Yeah.
a scoop for 10 o'clock. This is in scope to a degree. Are you aware of anyone actively engaged with the Unity Civic League, which is basically New Visions on the opposite side of Fairmount?
That's come up in a few conversations. Eric Mai, I've talked to him a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's been working hard. And I hit a wall with that as well. The information I had, I passed on to him, and he just didn't get a response. So I'm not sure what's happening. And what I shared with him, and what I'll say here too, is for me, I have to define a footprint for New Visions, but stuff that happens in the Fairmount area impacts things that happen elsewhere. In fact, like we're half of the Fairmount area, right? And so for me, anyone is welcome to be a part of New Visions, and New Visions is going to engage things beyond the footprint, but there is definitely a value to a more honed focus. So I don't know. And I don't know what the answer is. But yeah.
Well, I gave him a bit more aggressive answer than that, but this has come up in the context of trying to get Churchill Central reactivated. There are things that fall into Unity's bailiwick that come there, and I'm not interested in having. I think CHC is far too large as it is, and so I'm interested in breaking it back up into what it used to be comprised of. Yeah. And so I think capacity building within Unity versus having it folded into something else is my ambition. And so I've been trying to advocate to Eric if you've asked nicely a couple of times, you may have to be less nice.
Yeah. Well, and the other piece too is because I hear you, like for you or for any leader of a entity to focus on something that's outside the footprint can then create that's
mission creep.
Yeah. But the model that Mary Thompson would always do is if someone had cared about something, she's like, all right, well, I'm putting you in charge of that committee. So that's, I feel like that could be an option too, which I'd be happy to have that within New Visions. If something's happening north of Fairmount, that's important, and somebody cares about it, then hey, you know what? If you want to take on lead a committee around that, and you can have it under the banner of New Visions, but by all means, yeah. And actually to that end, that I'll say this, so it's on the recording. The other thing that I'm really pushing that needs to happen within New Visions is the pandemic stifled the whole process of bringing in the election process that was happening for officers got halted by the pandemic. And then engagement in New Visions got impacted by the pandemic. But in order for New Visions to be what it needs to be for the community, there needs to be more committed engagement. So that's something I'm pushing this year too, to get more people that are like, yep, I actually, I don't just show up to meetings I'm given an hour a month or an hour a week to this specific piece of New Visions. And so committee can be an easy way for that to happen. But yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Excellent. Thank you all. Have a fantastic morning. I've got a scoop.
Yeah. Hey, before you go, every single time I see you, I never remember Havis or Havis. Havis. Yes. I guessed on the beginning. I was like, no, that felt wrong.
No worries. It's there's two options. There's two options,
but I want to do the right one. Havis, thank you for being here.
Hey, y'all take care.
Gina, anything else you had before we jump off?
I think that is all. I look forward to more communications. I did fill out the survey from the email as well about participating with New Visions. This is right up my alley, honestly. because I am certified in community engagement through Harvard.
That's
So it's
good.
kind of use it. It's time to
It's a
use
big
it.
deal. Yep.
I'm also the PTA president, the PTSA president at my at Franklin Military Academy, and I feel
Awesome.
like a lot of the stuff that you're speaking of is also sharing love throughout the community in order to impact a better change, a positive change, especially in this area.
Yeah.
So I'm all for that. I'm not about, screaming and yelling about all the issues. Okay,
Yeah.
let's define the issues and then show some love on how we can combat. What is the love solution to
Mhm.
combat these things?
Yeah.
So, and I wouldn't, I would be remiss as a licensed minister also to know
Mhm.
that it's going to take much prayer.
Yep. Yep.
It will take much prayer,
Yeah.
but we can do it as long as there are enough, like you said, enough people that are dedicated to making this change. I am connected with a lot of the alumni, the college alumni that are like in the area, and they chose to work in the area as well, and they're looking for initiatives to join in and be a part of. They may not have time all the time, but they also are very quick to share information.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
That's great. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you filling out the form and just bringing a lot of value to even just this conversation today. So I greatly appreciate that.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
all right. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording.